with the last lecture for the day. And in fact, it's not going to be a lecture. It's just going to be a short story on a piece of software that's being written together with a friend, Vadim Ponomarev. And so let me put this slides over here. I'm going to share the slides with you from time to time, and not really all the time, but there's a few things I want to show with it. By the way, this is work together with Vadim Ponomarev from Petrozavodsk State University in Russia, northern Russia. The story starts like this. I mean, most people realize that the labeling, not exactly labeling, annotating a piece of graphics in software in like mid-80s. By mid-80s, you know, there was XFIG was out, and Tech was using the computer modern fonts, and XFIG was using the X11 fonts, and Adobe was coming up with tools to do PostScript figures, do figures and save it in PostScript, and they were using their own fonts. And these sets of fonts weren't talking to each other, and you build a document with those tools, and you get, you know, letters which were all over the place. You couldn't get a mathematical notation into a graphics, and it was a real mess. And then a bunch of people start developing some their own software for labeling graphics. I mean, there were pieces of software being shared by people that were writing PostScript annotations to PostScript files written by Mathematica, PostScript annotations to PostScript files written by MATLAB, and those became really a favorite because they were almost the only ones that did some form of rendering at that time, and annotating those files were really necessary. And by the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, there were a bunch of private software being circulated, and that was passed by hand to hand. You know, you annotate this way, you annotate that way, and it works only for Mathematica PostScript. There was, you know, this term Mathematica PostScript because it wasn't really PostScript. It was something that was very reserved for Mathematica. And then a software came along that resolved some of that mess, which was PSFrag. PSFrag came out with a proposition, which was, you know, to reserve a unique label inside the PostScript file, which would then be replaced by whatever you wanted it, designed by Tech, and placed at that particular location on the PostScript file. And it was really nice. You know, people used it for a long, long, long time, but it was heavily dependent on PostScript itself, and as such, it didn't really have a very easy pass into ZTech and LuaTech, and something needed to be done. And lots of other software got written in order to resolve this problem. You know, I listed on the board here a few of them. WARMReader by Ross Moore, PSTPDF, PDFRack, AutoPSTPDF, PSFragX, and there were all sorts of propositions. Some of them were to sort of, you know, cut the figure out of your manuscript and insert the labels at the correct places. Those labels could be, you know, elaborate Tech graphics labels. Then cut that picture off with a minimum box and save it into a file so that you could later use it in something that had the label burned in. Those solutions are sort of, they're not a full solution to the problem, because at the end of using some tool like this, you end up with graphics which have the fonts burned in, and this is exactly what you don't want. if you pass your manuscript over to the publisher may be using it. The publisher almost certainly is going to be using another set of fonts. And so he doesn't want any of your fonts burned into that particular image or none of that image. And mathematical images are the kind of images that publishers don't have the ability to deal with that very effectively. So you really want the facility for the fonts of the text to be used in the graphics and as the time of processing. And there are kind of 4 packages that do this. One of them is Overpic, another one is XY. Both of them, got the ideas from WARMReader that was introduced by Ross. Literally, what Ross brought up on this very nice package, I think at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, was sort of incorporated later on by XY completely, and was also incorporated by Overpic. And you can see I list 2 other ones. One is TKZ, which is TikZ, which is offered its own way to annotate, and you can annotate anything you want. You can annotate a JPEG, you can annotate a PostScript, or any other graphics. And then there's this other one, which is pinLabel, which isn't really a choice, because I'll go into the reasons why that is not exactly a choice for a good choice for labeling and progressing onto ZTech and to LuaTech. The work that needed to be done then was to be able to take a file which was written in PSFrag, meaning those labels which are processed by tech and have a reserved space in the PostScript file, and convert them into Overpic, XY, TikZ, or pinLabel. And we start tackling that with Vadim, Ponomarev about a few months ago. And we look at the situation of parsing those files, parsing those PSFrag files to find out what the labels are, to find out what the positions are. And for that, we needed to parse the PostScript. And parsing PostScript is a very tall order. I would say I would prefer 10 times, 1,000 times parsing tech than parsing PostScript. And PostScript describes the position of its objects by a position on the page by a matrix that does any sorts of rotations and then pushes it at a distance at this location by another vector that gets added. So what you have is 6 elements, A, B, C, D, E, F, that describes exactly where the element is on that page. And besides that, there are 3 levels of 3 reference coordinate reference axes. One is by PostScript itself, which is in points, and another one is the one given by the paper, which may depend on the paper you have on the printer, may depend on the printer, and so forth. Another one is the user, and then we start looking at this issue and how to convert, because this packages did use different systems of references, and if we're going to use tech to write them up, we would need to transform from one into the other, and that's what we did. In fact, Vadim did most of the work in here, most of the heavy lifting, with the help of Bill Kasselman's book on PostScript, and I want to say why pinLabel isn't the solution is literally because pinLabel is a rewrite of Geom PSFI, in fact, a rewrite of a very old piece of software that was designed to at the Geometry Center by Silva Levy, and And pinLabel really offers a very nice interface to enter your label. And people even wrote, software that you could use to find the position and pinpoint the position that the label should go, and give you the number, and you give the output and so forth. So it was very easy to do. But pinLabel redefines include graphics. It redefines the include graphics command, which is sort of a fairly basic command in LaTeX, in a LaTeX package. And it defines in terms of PSFrag, which is a very, very, very old package, which is no longer maintained. And again, it doesn't provide you with a path into either ZTech or LuaTeX, so that is out of the question. And so with the ability to transform the coordinates, we needed to find a way to parse the file and extract the coordinates out of the file, because remember, PSFrag reserves a position for the label inside the file, and we needed to find that. And with a hint from David Carlisle, I posted something on Stack Exchange, and Dave Carlisle mentioned that we did use GoScript to read some of those coordinates back in a long time ago. I guess it was during the Rascals at Stanford or something, a long time ago. And then we looked at the place, and indeed, GoScript is able to just parse the file, and given the label, extract exactly what are the 6 coordinate values that are necessary to locate that particular tag into the PostScript file. And then it was fairly easy to write a translator, and the translator came out. Vadim outputted in about a couple of days, and we now have a facility that takes a PSFrag file and write whatever you want. Writes an Overpic, an XY, or a TikZ file that puts the label exactly in the same positions that you had before. We have tested it in a few places. We'd like to test it more to explore some more possibilities of the usage of PSFrag. I would like to, for example, extend the test to the files that do use PSFrag, which are right now at the archive, and see how we would perform in that. But at a vault that we had with old journals, it performed spotless, and the differences between the positions of the 2 before and after are almost imperceptible to the eye, and you can take whatever file that you have, which is in PSFrag, then it has to run through LaTeX and then DVI-PS and then PS to PDF, and convert it immediately to something that will run into PDF LaTeX, ZTech, or LuaTeX. We're going to open source this pretty soon. It's going to be on GitHub, and if you do have projects that have used PSFrag in the past and that you need it converted, I'd like to hear it. I'd like to have a run and send you a file back that should run on any of those other texts. With that, I would like to finish the day for today, and hope to see you all here tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo, for great presentation and for sharing this. And thank you very much for what you did. I have actually questions for your talk. I wanted to ask you whether it's only for legacy PSFrag files. Is it correct?
Well, I mean, PSFrag files are supposed to be legacy. They only run on LaTeX DVI-PS framework, and you have and whatever else you use, kind of burns in, the labels into the image, which is highly undesirable. So I call it legacy, you know, and for example, you know, most publishers right now that make a decision that they're going to move their workflow into ZTAG because of, you know, ease of use of fonts, because of several other things. They are sort of held back by this legacy files that only work under the DVIPS workflow. So there's a necessity to move them out of it.
Yeah.
That's why I called it the lecture. That's why I called it talk, the last nail in the coffin. You know, it's to retire this.
Yep. A lot of post-script things were nice where they lasted, but yeah.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of content which was produced in the 90s and the 2000s using it up to this point. You know, we get you know, like in a set of about 50 journals that I have access to the record in source, we get an occurrence of PSFrag in about something on the order of 8-9%. And back in the 80s, back in the 90s and 2000s, and then now it's dropping out a little bit. But still, if you want to reprocess those files, if you want a book that you want to republish, you need to move out. You need to move out of PSFrag.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and I guess that it's all for our first day. And see you all for the next section. And thank you very much, Paulo, for the great